right, hello everybody. Welcome back and welcome to our third and final part of today's presentation. And in this last part, we will be going over the impact of trauma on our mind and body, providing a little bit more information on ways that it can impact us. Again, going back to that book title, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, we definitely can see so many ways that the body will store trauma. Additionally, we'll be going over who's impacted by trauma, ways that we might see it addressed in pop culture, and then some approaches before going to our resources, and then finally being able to provide you all with information about Fuller Life concepts and how you can get in touch with us if you'd like to learn more about us or even obtain services. So, to go in on the impact of trauma on our mind and body, the first study I wanted to highlight, which is a very popular study in the field of trauma, is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACE study. And this is where they formed a questionnaire and they asked individuals, thousands of individuals, a list of 10 questions regarding emotional abuse, physical abuse, and a couple of different areas. And these are, again, childhood experiences, and they were scored accordingly. And so what they found that was really prominent from this study was there was a link between an increased ACE score and chronic health issues. Something else that really was important from that study is that most of the individuals had at least one. From the thousands that were sampled, most of them had at least one. ACE score. And so there were links between not only physical health issues, but also mental health issues over the long term. The next thing I wanted to highlight was the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. A lot of us may have heard fight or flight or these different terms, whether that's you receiving your own therapy or in kind of our day-to-day lives and our exposure to growing knowledge on trauma and mental health. However, I wanted to just share a little bit more about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, or what that may look like. And so underneath you see stress response, and then also fight or flight, and then rest and digest. And so what fight, flight, freeze refers to is the stress response that happens when individuals are faced with something that is perceived threatening. And so this could include, for example, if you're walking down the street and there's a bear. Right. And this bear, you initially, your mind is always scanning, right, for these threats, but your mind sees, oh my gosh, there's a bear, right? So there are a couple of different responses, and that is fight, where you can fight back. You might flee, and that could be you're trying to run away or escape this threat, or you may freeze and you may just shut down, right? Not really knowing what to do. And a lot of us might see that kind of in our day to day as well. We're just kind of stuck and we don't feel like we can move, and we're just on shutdown a little bit. And the last one is fawn. And this is something that I heard put very powerfully in actually a TED Talk on the ACE study, and I'll also include that for individuals interested. But what if the bear is coming home every night? And so that is where we might see fawn, right? How can I appease that individual so that way I can escape danger, right? We go into some of those people pleasing behaviors when we're talking about the fawn response. And so these are the different types of ways individuals can react to stress. And again, those stress hormones are fired off and producing or motivating us to go into these different responses. And so when I have fight or flight here or rest and digest, there are two systems really kind of active that I highlight. It's oversimplified, but it definitely gives some context, and that could be our sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous systems. And one of those is, again, fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system, while parasympathetic is that rest and digest, right? And in order to kind of get to that calm, that parasympathetic kicks in to allow us to get to that relaxed state. But again, it can go to the other side of things where you might notice us in that kind of shutdown mode, and there's that takeover as well. So there's extremes, right, on every end of those. So the other thing I wanted to highlight, which is also a very powerful theory growing, of course, everything has the research just coming out on a yearly, monthly, really even basis, and that's polyvagal theory developed by Stephen Porges. And so what this goes into is the role of our or autonomic nervous system, which includes our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And it talks about how that system, especially the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in that autonomic nervous system, which stems from our brain stem through our abdomen. Carrying messages back and forth. It really highlights how this can play a role in regulating ourselves and our health and our behaviors, and how trauma can actually impact that system and also our vagus nerve and causing overstimulation to that, which can make it difficult to achieve emotional regulation. And we have these different responses that you may see once the traumatic situation kind of impacts us. And again, that trauma being stored in our bodies and affecting our bodies in those different ways, there's science behind it and how individuals will react to that. And so there is a possibility of soothing it, right? And this theory really does give context into how we can address it from a different perspective and really normalizing, again, normal reactions to abnormal situations. The last thing I want to highlight is the way trauma can impact our memory. There's different ways that trauma can come in and impact and fragment our memory. First being fragmentation. Again, it's very hard to develop those memories that are, beginning, middle, and end. And so you may see fragmented memories. A lot of times people only able to recall certain pieces, if anything at all, when it comes to traumatic situations. Also, you may see a change in patterns. And so, as an individual, might be able to recall something without really having to think about it, such as riding a bicycle. Trauma can change those patterns, right? And so, you may see someone who previously didn't tense up, right, when they're going toward a bicycle. Now there's a different memory associated with it. Now they're tensing up, right, at the thought of it or as approaching it. And so it can change our patterns in our memory. Also, it can store what is considered triggers. So many of these responses develop as a result of trying to keep ourselves safe, and we're always seeking safety in that sense. And so triggers, they change, right? And they become something that we are able to store and respond to in order to keep us safe. And so that is how we can also have our memory shifted with traumatic events. And lastly, it can make it difficult to store information. It can make it difficult to store these details regarding different situations and also memories themselves. A lot of individuals can have trouble recalling situations, and that could be a distancing, right, they've had between that experience and themselves, right, in order to try to remain safe. And so trauma does impact us, whether that's our long term health, physical and mental. Our stress response on a daily basis, we can find ourselves moving through all of these different responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, in multiple times throughout our day. We also have just different bodily structures that are involved in producing these different responses that have developed as a result of the traumatic situation and are operating even on some level outside of that. But again, the way that trauma impacts us can make things look very different. And so here is a little picture of the Adverse Childhood Experiences or ACE questionnaire study, or not study, but the questionnaire. And at the end of the presentation today, there is a link to the official study that you can read over if you are interested. And so this goes into the different questions, the 10 questions that are asked to make up the ACE score. So, one other thing I wanted to touch on briefly before moving into our next topic is how trauma can affect our window of tolerance. And so, this is actually a very interesting piece of research by Dan Siegel, and it goes a little bit into what our window of tolerance is, and that is where we're able to function just right, right? This is where we feel confident, we have our ability to cope. Our window of tolerance is exactly what we need in order to, okay, I'm here. I can get through this stressful situation. However, what has been focused on is how trauma can impact and shrink our window of tolerance. So, whereas we may start with a very full cup, the more traumatic situations that you have, that cup empties, right? And it starts to pour out little by little. And so we may have these different ways that we will respond to stressful situations that can send us into hyper or hypoarousal. And it may be a shorter window than what was before. So, window of tolerance is a very important concept as well. And also, working in therapy can sometimes allow individuals to try and lengthen that window of tolerance, right? So that way they're able to have things or a larger window of things that they feel confident and can handle. And they won't be sent into that hypo or hyper arousal as quickly. And so, hyper again is fight or flight, hypo arousal, that's where we're zoned out, numb, shut down. And so, the next part I would love to go into is who is affected by trauma. And so, according to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, approximately 25% of children will experience a traumatic event before the age of 16 years old. Additionally, according to FHE Health, more than half of the population will or have experienced trauma. And so ultimately, most individuals will experience a traumatic situation at one point or another in their lives. Again, so many of us can recall COVID and the pandemic and how that impacts us, and also what's happening in the world today, right? Where we're exposed to um, the wars happening and so many different things that kind of threaten our day to day and cause so much of that, I believe, fight or flight response in our daily living. And so that is also something to keep in mind. So many people can be affected by trauma. Not all individuals, as I stated, that experience a traumatic event will go on to develop PTSD. According to the National Center for PTSD, 6 out of 100 people go on to develop PTSD, and a lot of people fall below that threshold. But again, that doesn't negate the experience of trauma and how people can develop these different responses to traumatic situations. So much of this again is backed by science, and you will see that so many individuals are producing these different effects that a lot of us may not view as a response to trauma, but a lot of times it's very much a way that that individual has learned to adapt and try to keep themselves safe from these different experiences that they may have undergone. So ultimately, anybody and everybody can experience a traumatic event, and most individuals will go on to, if they have not already experienced a traumatic event. And so, briefly, as I stated, I wanted to go a little bit into trauma and pop culture. This, I think, I wanted to highlight just because so many of us are now being exposed to so much more information around trauma and traumatic experiences. And I think that's due to the fact that individuals are gaining more language and they're able to describe their experiences in a way that they weren't able to, let's say, when you're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're just trying to do your best in understanding what's going on. And a lot of times we have to make these judgments or fill in the blanks because we don't really have that explanation. And so we see, I think, a lot more individuals putting those things into their art, and they always have for many years. And again, with the growing popularity of social media, we see it, I think, a lot more. And so we have trauma really weaved into all facets of entertainment, whether that's our movies, something that you'll often see, especially when it comes to horror genres, are themes of trauma. There were a couple of themes of trauma that were weaved into some pretty popular horror movies, whether that was Boogeyman or Smile, or these different art pieces that really had this underlying theme of traumatic situations, whether that's loss of a parent, abuse, and others. We also have music. So many artists will put their experiences in their art, and you'll see that a lot when it comes to genres such as hip hop. For example, a lot of that was born out of just really wanting to speak to the experiences that they may have been having, whether that was in their communities surrounded by violence and poverty and so on and so forth. And so individuals started to have an outlet, right, and cope with those different experiences through their art. And music is such a big piece of that. And there's so many different artists now, different genres that also include their experiences of trauma in their art, but also expressing it, right, and coping with it. And additionally, going into art, painting, drawing, being able to express and process experiences that way. We also have social media. Again, people have pages now where you can go in and gain information in digestible pieces where you can learn a little bit more about trauma and the ways it impacts us. Also, we have television programs, whether that is reality programs. Netflix has different programs that you can look at, documentaries, and also you can learn a little bit more about those experiences. And you may even see some of the things that we talked about today in those pieces, and you'll be able to pick up a little bit more about how that person may be responding to a traumatic situation or experience. And then there's so many more. A big piece when it comes to trauma is sometimes individuals don't go on to develop PTSD or meet criteria for that, and sometimes that could be because of their protective factors, like abilities to regulate prior to, or their skills that they have for their ability to regulate, or even social support. And also something that has been seen as well is how art and different activities such as that allow individuals to process in a different way. And so, even dance, that's something that I didn't explicitly name, but there's so many different areas that you can see it, and it's almost a healing journey for a lot of individuals to be able to process through their experiences. And so, this, even though it can be protective, it can also be something that individuals do to cope. With the experiences that they've had, and also to be able to connect with others who may have also had those experiences. So, something I wanted to go into, just as a brief overview, so you know what could be available to you, and that is trauma treatment and approaches. So, we have individual, community, and societal levels. I love to put things into these three different levels, which is very, I will say, synonymous with social work. However, I think it's so important because, yes, we can say that an individual needs to do all of this work, right? But at the end of the day, there's so many other things that also need to happen in order to promote healing in our world. And so, individual, community, and societal, also broken down as micro, meso, and macro. Micro refers to working directly with the individuals or families. And so, that's trying to get them access to different things, or treating them. For mental health issues or something else. Meso is working with groups or organizations such as schools, businesses, neighborhoods. And then macro is working toward large scale systematic change by crafting laws and petitioning government, molding social policy. And so I'll go briefly into these different pieces. So, first, to start on those individual pieces. So, we have different trauma treatments and approaches. We have cognitive and behavioral approaches that could include TFCBT, CBT, DBT, ACT, CBT, exposure therapy, all of which have this idea that, again, there are these cognitions that underlie a lot of the distress, and the goal is to shift that. And with exposure therapy, the goal is to desensitize individuals to the traumatic stimuli in situations through different techniques of exposure, whether that's imaginal or in person or in vivo. Sometimes that you'll hear that term as well. And so, again, trying to change those cognitions is a very key or core piece, or dealing with the cognitions in a different way. We also have DBT that is very big on involving emotion regulation, distress tolerance, mindfulness skills, and interpersonal skills. Again, they have those different pieces, and again, in order to achieve wellness. Acceptance commitment therapy, accepting things that may be outside of an individual's control and trying to commit to change, right? That aligns with their values. Cognitive behavioral therapy, again, identifying those distorted thinking patterns and trying to shift that or change that. And so that just gives a little bit of context to how you may see a cognitive or behavioral, or cognitive and behavioral approach discussed. Some of these are third wave cognitive behavioral approaches as well. So it's just saying stemmed from CBT. We also have narrative exposure therapy. And again, as we talked about with the impact on memory, a lot of times individuals struggle to develop those coherent beginning, middle, and ends, and have that chronological story. And so, with narrative exposure therapy, it is going through the lifespan and developing that. Narrative for the individual and going through that and allowing them to review that with a new and a different meaning. Then we have eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, as I mentioned before. And with EMDR, a lot of times you will see an individual maybe looking back and forth. You may see a kind of a lot of times with the finger or something in front of them, so that way they're following it with their eyes. And again, it's to engage. It's bilateral stimulation, both parts of the brain, and it's designed to alleviate stress associated with traumatic memories. The story goes that Francine Shapiro was walking and noticed that as she was recalling a distressing situation in her life, she wasn't experiencing the same intensity of emotion as before. And so that is the basis of EMDR. And it has, or you can find a lot of individuals who have been trained and need to be formally trained in EMDR in order to administer it. Then we have somatic experience. And the idea, again, is that trauma can be stored in our bodies. And a lot of individuals need support in trying to release that trauma that has been stored in bodies through different ways. And that could be through body awareness or different techniques in order to release some of that stored trauma. Another common way that you may see trauma treated is through medications. And so that could include SSRI, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are all prescribed by medical doctors, including psychiatrists, in order for an individual to get treatment for medication. And then also the last one, which again is, I think, gaining a lot more attention and support, and that is complementary and alternative medicines. You have so many different ways that individuals can also treat trauma, including through yoga or acupuncture or even acupressure. There's something called emotional freedom technique, in which individuals tap these different points that are said to be connected to different issues an individual may be struggling with. And the idea is to try and regulate that experience in a different way through tapping on those different pressure points. You have the arts, you have meditation, dietary ways of trying to manage traumatic symptoms and responses. And so these are just some of those individual approaches that people can take. And even some of these things can be done on group levels and also larger levels in order to promote healing and wellness. Ultimately, nobody can tell you how and when to heal from your trauma. Um, that is an individual decision, and individuals have to live and survive in the world at the end of the day. And so it is a complete individual experience and decision. So the last two that I wanted to go over fall in line with those community societal changes, those larger changes that we've talked about. And so a big one is trauma-informed approaches. And so the idea of a trauma-informed approach allows individuals to become more aware of what trauma is and ways that we can deal with traumatic situations. And it's shifting from that question that so many of us ask around how or what is wrong with you to like, how can I help? Um, and how can I support? And it's really trying to shift that language and being able to help people understand the ways trauma can impact us and the ways individuals can respond to a traumatic situation in hopes to provide different needs, right, within these different environments. And that can be trying to provide safety and other things. And the last thing is social justice and change. There's so many things in the world that can contribute to traumatic stress. That includes poverty, that includes discrimination and oppression, that includes an individual that doesn't have access to adequate resources on a day-to-day basis, and that individual is working and trying to find those resources every day, and there's never a stop, right? But there's still those barriers. And so there needs to be more socioeconomic programs that are allowing individuals to have access to the different needs, so that way they can move up on that hierarchy to be able to meet needs in different areas. Also, experiencing environments of safety. If you're in a workplace, being able to identify safe places or safe spaces for you in those experiences and situations. Additionally, with schools, same thing. Being able to help an individual feel safe is such a key thing, because we're always seeking safety at the end of the day. And equity, being able to, again, have enough resources for individuals to even that playing field at the end of the day. And so trauma, yes, can be treated on that individual level, but there also is a need for it to be addressed on much larger levels, including in our communities and in our society and in our world. And so, as I stated, there are several resources here that will be linked at the end of the presentation that will give you more information on some of the things that I addressed today. And as I stated, I wanted to provide more information about how you can contact Fuller Life Concepts and get more information if you're interested in services or interested in obtaining individual services for yourself or community services. Our number here is listed as well as our email, or you can scan our QR code here for a free consultation. Again, my name is Deandra Johnson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I thank you for getting to the end of today's presentation. And I hope again that you can take away a little bit more information about trauma and what it is and how it can impact us. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I would, of course, love to connect. And again, thank you for sticking with me.